So do you think your sewing machine hates you? You have major issues and you wish you could just focus on the sewing part, not on the issues that the sewing machine gives you? Watch this video because I'm gonna help you fix the most simple issues that might be happening to you. And just a hint, everyone says it's about the tension. It might be the tension. We're gonna talk about tension later in the video, but there's many different things that could be happening that you'd be missing or doing wrong that could save you. So stay tuned. You know, it's actually normal. So if you're a beginner and you're starting sewing, or even if you only had one machine and then you're starting on a new machine, issues can come up and it's normal. And so, you know, we're gonna figure out ways for you to avoid those issues and make sure that you can just focus on your sewing. Okay, so I'm gonna share with you 10 tips that it's like a checklist that you should go through it every time you have any problem with your sewing machine, and you might want to just keep those in mind, so every time you're like, oh, might be this or might be that. Okay, so let's get started. First thing, are you keeping your foot, you know, the machine foot up when you thread it? Are you keeping the foot down when you're sewing? Okay, that might be crazy, but the reality is you're like, what do you don't know? Am I stupid or something? No, it's because we forget, right? Sometimes, one thing, for instance, the threading when the foot is up, I didn't know about that. The thing is when you lift the foot, you know, this lever, in this machine, for instance, I have this lever, and when I lift the lever, what does it do? Besides lifting the foot so you can slide the fabric underneath, it also releases the tension discs of the machine. And then when you thread it, at that time, the thread is just gonna place itself on place. So it won't be, you know, twisted or wonky or anything. And then you can lower the foot, and then the tension discs doing their work and giving the tension to the thread. This machine specifically is an amazing machine, but when I've had this problem many times. I forget to thread without the foot up, and then it's not giving tension, and then it starts to jam. So that's very important, lifting the foot when you thread it. All right. And also when I'm talking about lowering the foot when you're sewing, that's because many times, and especially me when I do embroidery, sometimes, because then there's no foot embroidery, I tend to forget to lower the lever, right? And then the tension is wrong and everything is wrong, and then it doesn't work. And I've seen students and many people doing this, especially when it's a mechanical machine. Some automatic machines, they don't sew if the foot is up, but those mechanical ones, they just keep sewing, and then it jams the thread and it's terrible. So that's important. And that brings me to the number 2 tip, which is, are you threading your machine correctly? You know, this one is very simple. Some machines are more complicated, but that's very important. You have to make sure that everything is threaded correctly through every loop, everything. And how you find that out, you look at your manual. If you have a new machine, it comes with the manual. And if you have an old machine, you just go find the manual line and make sure you're threading correctly. Believe me, if you do one wrong thing, it might mess the whole system, okay? Because machines are very precise and they need to work correctly the way they're supposed to. And that actually, talking about the manual, brings me to the other 2 tips, the number 3 and number 4, which are the needle and the bobbin. The needle and the bobbin also have to be in a certain position, okay? The needle, for instance, has to have, that's like a gap in the needle that has to be facing front in most machines. Some machines have to be facing the side, and you have to find that in your manual and make sure your needle is correctly installed all the way up and in a position that it's correct for your machine. And the same thing with the bobbin. The bobbin case, and there's a bobbin case and the bobbin inside of the bobbin case. Some machines you just drop the bobbin there, and some have the bobbin case like this one, right? And so there is a way to place the bobbin case in the machine, and there is also a direction that the thread, you know, like clockwise or anti-clockwise, where the thread is going, that you have to obey to the manual. So check your manual and make sure your needle and your bobbin are correctly positioned on your machine. Now, the next thing on our checklist is oil and cleaning. Is your machine clean? Is it oiled? And you're like, oh my God, I'm lazy, I don't want to do it. I get it. I don't like cleaning the machine either. I just want to be sewing. But for perfect performance of your sewing machine, of this amazing equipment you have to take care of it. The same way we take a shower and we drink water and we eat food, the machine needs oil because it's a mechanism that has to move, and you have to clean it, right? And so sometimes we look at it and it looks clean, but there's those like dust bunnies and things that are, that get stuck in the machine, and so you have to get rid of those. So open the machine up at least like a couple times a month, or depends on how much you sew really. Guess where you're gonna find that out? On the manual or in the manual, right? So look at your manual, see where you can open the machine up. Like this one, for instance, I removed this lid here, I removed the bobbin. Especially a good place to look for dust bunnies is under the needle plate. When you remove the needle plate, where the feed dogs are, those things that push the fabric, usually get stuck there. A lot of like things from fabric, from thread. So when you clean that, you get a nice brush and you brush that out, and then you're good to go. What I like to do is to vacuum. I've heard that people don't like vacuuming because if there's something loose, the vacuum is gonna pull it. But I like to like brush it and then vacuum with a little, the little part of the vacuum, and then removes all the dust, and that's good. And then after it's all clean of dust, I oil it. And the oil points on the machine, you also find in your manual. Each machine is different, and there are certain points. Don't put oil on everything because there are certain gears and things that shouldn't be oiled. So you have to find out exactly where in your machine you put the oil. But make sure you keep oiled and clean at all times, as much as possible, so the machine can perform well. Trust me, that does make a difference, and it can ruin your sewing or jam your thread if you don't take care of it. All right, now the next one, point number 7. How is your stitch length? Because I have seen that happening. Some people are like, my machine is not sewing, and that's because the stitch length is at 0. And when you put the stitch length at 0, the machine is supposed to stitch on the same point. Length means like the largest, the bigger number of the length, the longer the stitch is gonna be, long, right? And so you have to make sure that it's on a certain length that you wanna sew with. Usually it's like 3, 3.5, 2.5, something like that. So make sure the length is correct for the job you're doing, and also learn from your manual what's the ideal for your machine. And you can also test it. Go and sew with the different lengths, and you learn better what's the correct one. Okay, but don't forget that when you have the checklist. And also there's the tension, but the tension, here the die with the tension and all, but we're going to talk about that last because it's more complicated. The point number 8 on our checklist is the fabric. So there is a thing that the machine does. I like to, I grew up sewing, so I do know, and I'm pretty sure that machines have their own wheels and they like act accordingly with what they want that day, So there is like a thing that the fabric does to the machine. So you have to understand that, for instance, if you're sewing some canvas fabric and then all of a sudden you switch to silk velvet, the machine is not gonna go straight from one to the other and not act up on. So you always have to consider if you're doing the right move, if you're, is that because the fabric? So how you fix this? There's not really a fix, but when it comes to stitch length, tension and all that, it might change according to the fabric that you're using. So if, say you're sewing canvas and it's like cotton, so it's not very slippery and it's great, and then you switch to silk velvet, for instance, or some sort of like velour or something like that, the tension is not going to be the same. So you have to adapt to the fabric, okay? Just make sure that, sometimes you even have to help the machine a little bit. You have to turn the wheel a little bit if it's a difficult fabric, or there are some tricks that we can talk about in another video, but some things that you can do if you're sewing like silk, some sort of crazy silk if you're sewing. And so then you have to do certain things to help out, or jersey or something like that, okay? So make sure that you be patient and understand that when you switch the fabric will make a difference. And that brings me to the needle because, you think like machine needle is one thing and doesn't that. But the needle also has to work with the fabric that you're using, right? So if you're sewing, let's say denim, like jeans, you're like upcycling a pair of jeans into something, you need some strong needle. Or for instance, if you're doing leather, if your machine can handle leather, at least like fashion leather, you know, like light leather, there is a needle specific for leather, because the leather needle, it has like it's like a knife that will stab the leather, right? If you use, for instance, knit for sewing like t-shirt material, there is the ballpoint needle. The ballpoint needle, just like it says, it's like round. They're probably all round, but you know, ballpoint, because what happens is, you know how the weave of the knit is? Look at, if you have any like knit sweater around, look at it. That's how a t-shirt is, but it's tiny. So when you are sewing with the ballpoint, it doesn't stab the thread, it goes through the thread of the weave. So then it doesn't make holes. That's why it's the ballpoint. Or there's the jersey needle that acts the same way. But if you use a jersey needle or a ballpoint needle for your to sew leather, for instance, it's not going to stab. It's going to be that ball hitting the leather, and it's not going to go through, and it's going to cause problems. So that's very important. Make sure you're using the right needle for the material you're working with. So for most of everything, you just use the universal needle. That's how I do, at least. Like, I start with the universal needle unless I'm gonna sew something very specific like jersey or leather or heavy fabrics, right? But most fabrics, cotton, things that I sew, I use the regular one. If I'm gonna sew a very light silk, a very fine fabric, then I'm gonna use a very thin needle. Needles have sizes and types. If you want to learn more about that from me, leave a comment here and I'll make a video just talking about the types of needles, okay? But make sure you know what you're using so you don't be frustrated on your sewing. And now, last but not least, the tension, the monster of the tension, right? I know everyone has problems with the tension of the machine. I do have problems myself with the tension many times, but I learned how to deal with it. First off, patience. And you have just to learn how it works, okay? What is the thing? So basically, understand that a stitch happens with the interlacing of the top thread and the bottom thread, right? So the image is like this. So it has to be, they meet in the middle and they interlace, and that's how it's called the lock stitch. So they're locking and sewing to join the fabrics together. So they have to have the same amount of going in from the bottom and from the top. If that's not happening, then something is wrong. I'll give you an idea how you can figure out what's wrong, which sounds counterintuitive, but it's true. If you're having problems, so say you're sewing and your machine is jammy, the thread is jammy, or it's not looking good. First off, when you're sewing, the top thread, and you can test using like 2 different colors on the top and the bottom, all contrasting, right? The fabric and the both threads are different, so you can see through. When you sew, you're supposed to see on the top, you're supposed to see only the top thread, not the bottom thread. And same thing the bottom. The bottom should be perfect and you see only the bottom thread. So if you're sewing and you see the bottom thread coming up, there's something wrong. Okay, or if it's the top thread is tight and then the bottom is like showing. So what does that mean? If you're having problems on the top, that's the counterintuitive part. If the top thread, if the top of your sewing, your stitching is looking weird, the problem is in the bottom. And if the bottom is jamming or looking weird, the problem is at the top thread. Okay, so keep that in mind. So say, which is the most common problem? When we're sewing and then it jams underneath, like it jams, and either you didn't lower the foot. If you don't lower the foot, believe it, it's gonna be messed up, and the bottom is gonna be jammed, that bunched up thread. But if your foot is down, if everything else we talked about so far is fine, and you see that the bottom thread is wrong, is like jammed, the problem is the top. So then you have to go through the machine, and most likely it's going to be the threading that's not correctly. Something is making the thread having a hard time going through. It's not like flowing. To me, that happens a lot. Sometimes it gets caught, the thread gets caught somewhere, and then it holds, and then the bottom jams. Okay, so if it jams in the bottom, you gotta make sure everything on the top is working. Now, if it's the top is weird, if you're sewing and then starts to jam on the top, something is strange on the top, the bottom thread is wrong. Either the bobbin is not placed correctly, the bobbin is not flowing, and then you have to fix the bobbin. So that's basically how you can fix the problems with your tension, and then test. Don't try to not mess with the tension of the bobbin. You know, usually machines come, unless it's an old machine that you just bought and something is wrong. If you already used the machine and it was working properly and then all of a sudden it's not, don't mess with the bottom tension, because it's probably not that. You have to figure out what else is doing. Maybe the bobbin's wrong, maybe, you know, the size of the bobbin could be wrong, or the position of the bobbin could be wrong. You don't want to change there's that screw that you can change on the bobbin, but you don't want to do that because that might ruin everything. You can only play with the top thread tension, and then you go on your machine, find where it is, and go. And it's very subtle. You don't need to like move a lot the dial. You move a little bit and then you test it, and then you move a little bit and then you test it. And then the last thing is, remember how I said sometimes it's not really giving problems, but if you were trying to sew with 2 collar threads, bottom and top, and they're showing, right, the bottom is showing on top, the top is showing on the bottom. How do you do? Then you mess with the tension a little bit. If you're sewing and the bottom thread is coming up, that means the top thread is too tight. You can see like there's, you know, it's tight, and then the bottom is coming up. So then you release the top, and then it's gonna equalize it, okay? That's the most common thing that happens, and then you can do and fix it, okay? And if you have any questions, if I can help you, make sure that you leave a comment here, and then I'll respond to you and help you. All right, now if you don't have a sewing machine yet, or you're looking to find one and use one, I made this video here that I talk about how to pick a sewing machine for you. So I hope that helps you, okay? And I hope you like this video. I hope you share. I hope you subscribe if you haven't yet. Give a like, it doesn't cost much, it helps me. And stay tuned for my next videos. All right, thank you.